Welcome back. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you the basics of giving your tape a tune-up. It's always a good idea when you've purchased a tape from eBay or a garage sale, or if you have a box of tapes that you've been storing in your garage and you've decided to play them. It's always a good idea to give them a tune-up before you pop them into your player, because as these tapes age, there is a lot that can deteriorate on them, and just popping an old tape in your player is a recipe for disaster, and you're almost guaranteed that it's going to get eaten or damaged in some way. A good tune-up repair kit will have the following items in it. I've got 99% rubbing alcohol. I've got a box cutter or utility knife. I've got some lubrication. Lithium grease works really well. I've got some cotton rounds, cotton swabs, a pair of scissors, some splicing tape, some replacement felt pads, some sensing foil tabs, some replacement foam pressure pads, and a splicing block. And I do sell the felt pads, the sense foil, the foam pads, and splicing blocks on this website. If you go to my store, you will see them. Okay. Now, when you open up the cartridge, more likely than not, the foam pads will be deteriorated. So you would want to carefully remove the pads. In this case, these pads are in good condition. But I'm going to remove the reel here to show you what things inside the actual cartridge may go bad and cause a problem. So typically what you would do is you'll want to remove the foam pads, and you'd want to scrape off what was left of the old pads, clean the plastic strip really well with the rubbing alcohol. And in some cases there's going to be residue left over on the strip, and so what I do is I just flip it over to the back and then put one of the replacement pads on the back strip because it's nice and clean. And these pads that I sell are peel and stick. You just peel them off, stick them on. They've got the smooth surface on them like the originals. So you want to also make sure when you're cleaning this that you do not get the sticky debris all over everything. Like the play tape, you want to make sure that that's out of the way, because you do not want to get that stuff all over the tape. The rubber pinch roller, rubber, or in some cases plastic. They went to a lot of manufacturers ended up using plastic pinch rollers, but you'll want to take the pinch roller off. Sometimes you'll have to gently pry it off because they put little plastic tabs to hold it on. But you want to take this off, and it usually will be covered with graphite like that. And you'll want to clean it with the rubbing alcohol until the cotton pad comes back clean, until all the residue is off. Also, this spindle right here, it's very important that you clean this with a Q-tip and rubbing alcohol, because some manufacturers used some sort of a lubrication on this, and after 30-some years it's turned to chalk. In some cases it's turned into a hard substance that will cause the tape to drag. I have had several tapes where I have had a problem where they drag really bad, and I have retensioned them. I have made sure that the spindles were lubed. The capstan shaft was clean in the player, and I just could not figure out what the problem was, and the problem ended up being dried lubricant on this spindle. So I make sure now every time I tune up a tape to clean this off really good. And then I like to add a little tiny dab of lubricant back on here with a Q-tip. You know, just dab a little bit on, because you do not want to put too much on, because it'll end up getting all over the play tape. So after this is cleaned off, I put a little bit of a little tiny dab of grease on it. Same with this spindle here that the reel rides on. After I cleaned it off, I put a little bit of lubricant down here towards the bottom. But that's one of the last things that I do. Typically the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to clean the outside of the cartridge before you open it up. You're going to want to clean the front and the back of the cartridge with the rubbing alcohol. You're going to want to clean the inside, all the little nooks and crannies with the Q-tips and the cotton pads. Some cartridges are really bad inside and some are not quite as bad. A lot of it just depends on how much it was used, if it was taken care of, the type of the manufacturer of the actual play tape itself. Some of them have a tendency to shed more than others. So basically you want to just clean everything. Clean out up here where the pad was. Clean all the nooks and crannies. And then before I grease these spindles, what I do, and this is very important, I put this tape back in here. What I do now before I grease the spindles, you're going to want to hand turn this one complete play, basically. And what I mean by that is you open the cartridge up, and if the sensing foil splice is visible, if you're lucky, the sensing foil splice will be visible, but more often than not, it is not visible. It will be buried somewhere, you know, in the reel. If the sensing foil splice is visible, then what I would do is take this out, take the reel out, replace the sensing foil tabs. I always replace them, even if it looks to be okay. I always replace them, because there have been times where I've, you know, taken the cartridge apart to tune it up, advanced the tape to where the splice is showing, pulled on the tape a little bit, and the splice seemed to be in good condition, and pop it in, start playing it, and it ends up falling off after the first or second play, and then the tape gets eaten. So I always replace the sensing foil splice with every tape that I get, even if the tape was brand new, never been opened. You know, I have several of those, but I always replace the sensing foil splice. So anyway, what you're going to do is you're going to hand turn this reel, and the tape's going to want to come up usually here and here, so you got to be mindful of that and keep pushing it back down, because sometimes it'll want to come up on the outer diameter here of the reel. You'll have to keep pushing it down. But you're going to want to hand advance this tape one complete play, and that would be even if the sensing foil was displayed at the top here, was at the top, and you replaced it, you're going to want to hand turn this until the sensing foil disappears, comes all the way through the reel, and comes back out again, because oftentimes this tape pack hardens. And so if you just pop this in, if you do a tune-up, you know, you lube the spindles up, clean the roll, pinch roll, replace the pads, you're still going to end up running into problems, because a lot of times what will happen is it'll start becoming harder and harder to turn, and so you have to be gentle with it, because the tape pack is hardened, and so it's re-loosening back up, so to speak. And sometimes what will end up happening is that the sense foil, there will be a chemical reaction, and the play tape that is sitting on top of the sensing foil splice, if it's, you know, buried somewhere in the reel here, it will actually melt to the sensing foil splice. So as you're turning this, the tape is gonna start getting out of round, and you're gonna end up seeing a big gap on one side. And so what you'll have to do is take your a small non-magnetic screwdriver, and gently, or your fingernail, and gently pry that piece of tape that's stuck to the sensing foil off, and then continue on with the advancing, and it will usually go back into round. Sometimes you have to cut the tape. I usually cut it at the sensing foil splice to retension it, because sometimes after you do a complete, you do the complete advancement for basically one whole play, and you find that the tape pack is loosened up and there's been no problems, but there's a gap. The tape pack is very loose. You will need to tighten that up, and I will show you how to do that in another video. But basically, before you play an old 8-track tape, you're going to want to give it the tune-up, which will include, to recap, you're going to want to clean and lube the 2 spindles inside. Replace the foam pads if necessary, or if it has the metal spring type pads, sometimes the felt is missing, and so you will need to replace the felt. Sometimes you get lucky and the felt tab that has come off is still in the cartridge, and you can just glue it back to the metal spring. Otherwise you need to replace it, and I do sell replacement felt strips. But the hand advancing, the sensing foil and hand advancing is very important, because you do not want the tape to get jammed up in the player because the tape pack is hardened. If the tape pack is too loose and you've got it's out of round and there's a gap, it's not going to sound good. It's going to drag, and it very well could get eaten. You don't want that. And likewise too, if the tape pack if it starts to become really, really hard to turn, you don't want to keep forcing it. You may have to go ahead and cut the tape, pull some out of the center, splice it back together with some splicing tape, and continue on with the advancing. Usually you won't have to get that. That's only like in extreme cases, having to get the splicing tape out and make a repair like that. But it does happen sometimes, and that's why it is so important to do this by hand the first play, because you're going to, it's going to show any problems that are going to arise, and it's much better to deal with it while you're turning it by hand than if the cartridge is inside the player. That can be a bad situation for your tape. So once you finish the tune-up, put your pads back in, give everything a once over. Once the tape tension looks good, everything's turning freely, everything's nice and clean, put it back together, pop it in the player. And what I usually do is I pop it in the player, let it play for about 5 to 10 seconds, pull it back out, make sure everything looks good, that it doesn't appear to be getting eaten or anything, and then you're usually good to go. Sometimes after a tune-up, after a couple plays, the sound will be a little draggy, and you'll notice that the tape pack has loosened up significantly, and there will be enough to where there'll be gaps. A gap, like if you turn the cartridge on its side like this, there'll be a gap. You'll be able to see a gap in between the hard plastic part of the reel and the play tape. And when that happens, you will need to tighten up the tension. If the tape is hard to turn, it's too tight, and it will need to be loosened up. And like I said, I will do a video on how to do that. So, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.